Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Scrutiny meeting, Norwich City Council. Item 1 is apologies. I've received apologies from both Councillor Thomas and we also have an apology from Councillor Osborne, and Councillor Champion is here substituting for him. So welcome, Councillor Champion. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Item 3, minutes of the Scrutiny Committee on the 9th of June. Are people happy that they're an accurate record and we can agree those? I have some nods and otherwise. Yep, nods. Thank you. So, item 4, we should have received a report. We were going to receive a verbal update from Councillor Vivian Thomas, who's our rep on the Scrutiny safety panel, sub-panel, but as she said, apologies, we won't be receiving that update today. So we'll move on to item 5, which is a report from the Norfolk Health and Overview Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Burchett-Colton, you were there today, so can you give us a brief synopsis?
I can tell you what we were talking about, and then if I can send a report after that, that would be better, if that's okay. So we're talking about annual health checks for people aged over 14 with learning disabilities, looking after children and adults with severe mental illness in Norfolk and Waveney, and health checks on the disability people with learning disabilities, looking after children, severe mental illness, and then the children's neurodevelopment disorders and the waiting times for assessment and diagnosis. So it's quite heavy, to be fair, but I can get a report to you, James, the next couple of days, and then send it around. Is that okay?
That'd be great, thank you. I think actually that sounds like a really important series of issues that were being looked at. So a member's happy that we'll get a written report on that. So yeah, thanks very much for that, Councillor Burchett-Colton. So we'll move on to item 6, which is our work programme. Just one thing to draw your attention to on that. We talked about looking at carrying out some scrutiny on refugees. If I can ask committee members to provide any thoughts they have on what that scrutiny might look like. Leonie, do you want that to be sent to you? If you could send that to Leonie by the 19th of August, that will allow officers to collate that, so at our September meeting we can decide how to take forward that scrutiny and what the best mechanism for that is. Councillor Stutley.
Thank you, Chair. And on the work programme, it occurred to me that we've not included the item on levelling up. It's something that I think that is of great interest to local authorities, levelling up and working or not working as it for local authorities. So I would like to try and get that into the work programme with other members' agreement. And I was hoping that the 10th of November would be an ideal opportunity to add it as a second item, not to bump into that, but to add it as a second item for that date, please.
Can I go, Officer? Thank you for that. Officer, comment on the sort of practicalities of levelling up in November.
Our levelling up fund bid went to Cabinet. Was it last week? The week before? Last week, wasn't it? Obviously, we'll hear the outcome of that in October, after which detailed delivery plans and so on will need to be drawn up based on the outcome and whether or not we are successful or successful in part, as the case may be. I think personally, if we might not hear until October on whether or not we're successful, it would be a touch premature to look at that as part of a November meeting. It might be something that would be better to look at when you look at your work programme around that time and then say, okay, what's been the outcome? If it's been unsuccessful, the Scrutiny Committee may quite rightly want to understand why. Is that because of government policy, albeit that has similarly been scrutinised within central government around how they have distributed funds in the past, so the element to which we should do that versus the central government intentions around that might or not be unclear. Might or might not be unclear at that time. And if we are successful, then there might want to be discussion about, okay, do we want to have some scrutiny work done, or how is that being delivered, what outcomes are we gaining, how are we managing and monitoring those outcomes. But until we know, whether or not we've been successful, it'd be very difficult to determine what that scrutiny would look like.
Thank you for that. Well, I mean, just looking at the work programme, on the 19th of January, we're looking at the refresh of the corporate plan. I wonder whether it would be possible to look at levelling up in that same meeting, whether that would be too much work. But I mean, we're not looking at a new corporate plan from the outset, so I wonder whether those two things could be undertaken in the same meeting. Councillor Stutley.
Yeah, I would support that, given what Leah has told us. I think obviously November will be probably too short timetable to bring it in. So yeah, I would go for February. Maybe an opportunity for December, but January actually looks like
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Carlo.
Thank you, Chair. Just so it's proving very difficult to hear, and I think there's a few guests might be finding it, they may be finding it difficult to hear, but I certainly am sitting here. So,
That's a very valid point. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, because
yeah.
this is an interesting thing because I can hear you very well. I'm struggling with people on the left-hand side here, so.
I will get closer to my mic because we do need to do that anyway. Can you hear me now? That's the table.
We do have some pressures in the summer months where we need to have the windows open, but we have singing that is coming in very clearly.
James, it may break with convention, but surely they're welcome just at the edge of the table.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that if other members are happy with that.
Yeah.
You're going to get asked questions.
Yeah. No, we definitely don't stand on convention here, so no, welcome. So that was the work programme. I don't think there's anything else we need to say on that. So let's, I think now. We're now on item 7, which is a report from the communal bins and fly tipping task and finish group. For those of you who are using digital, this will be a separate PDF to flip over to. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Oliver, who's the Cabinet Member for the bins. Thank you. So I'd also like to thank Councillor Stutley for steering us through the task and finish group in relation to this bins and fly tipping. So for the purposes of the meeting now, Councillor Stutley will say a few words to sort of outline the work that the committee's done. I'll then ask Andy Summers, who's up for a sort of officer response and an update from your position, and then we'll get over to some member questions. No doubt some of those will come in the direction of you, Kate, and you can sort of chip in as necessary, and I think that should be a good discussion. So, Councillor Stutley.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so for the benefit of members of the public and new members, we set up a task and finish group around about the turn of the civic year last year. So we look at these bins and fly tipping issue, which is something that affects most wards in the city, and in particular at some of the central city wards. There's high levels of fly tipping anecdotally, and what we wanted to look at was the statistics for those fly tipping incidents and reporting, and try and come up with some practical solutions that are going to help us to improve both the look of the city and to reduce the fly tipping and increase recycling as a result of that. The process started, as I said, last year, and it was quite a slow kick-off. We had a meeting where we discussed the terms of reference for the meeting, but unfortunately it wasn't noted, and that's something that we can learn going forward, and we discussed in the previous scrutiny meeting about how those can work. So we've learned quite a few things from this. We had a couple of meetings. The 5 of us at the original, 2 sadly left the committee. They've been replaced by Councillor Julie Colton and Councillor Dry. And we had some initial feedback from members of the public when we visited them and saw for ourselves some of the 5 big hotspots and the main drops. And Councillor Osborne showed us around and hosted that day, and the chair was with us that day as well. Following that, later in the summer and towards the autumn, we collected some data from the previous 2 years of fly tipping and other environmental services reports into the council, where we got some very detailed data about the number of reports received and the type of data, and so the type of waste that was collected by environmental services teams. And that was used to inform a subsequent draft report and formulate a basis of a survey which went out a couple of months ago and finished on the 30th of June, where we had actually a phenomenal response. 1,325 people responded. We also had many hundreds of comments along with that report. As this was only a couple of weeks ago, we've not been able to fully analyse that data yet, so we've had a supplementary report given to us today with some, again, high-level annotations about the comments that we received. But I will circulate that detail to the members, my email address. Okay, so I think that sums it up. And I'll take any questions on the process and present the report.
Yeah,
that seems sensible?
that's fine. Do any members have any questions specifically about the process rather than the content of the report itself? Councillor Champion and then Councillor Hundley.
Well, I've just got a question. I was trying to do some background reading around this, but I could find I couldn't find any information leading up to this report. I was trying to get a grip of the topic, the broader topic, and there didn't seem to be any publicly accessible background reports or information available. I was just wondering if maybe I was missing something, or if there was more information available.
I'm happy to pick that up insofar as I think it's been discussed frequently at various meetings of this committee, so all of the publicly available minutes from this committee will have references to it and the rationale around why we set it up. Yeah. Councillor Handley.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Councillor Scrutiny, you mentioned there were issues with noting the start of this process, what we can learn going forward. Would you just elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, initially when we set up the group, we had a meeting, we discussed what we wanted to achieve from the group and the results from the scrutiny that we were going to carry out. And unfortunately, as a newbie to both the committee and chairing a subcommittee, it was my mistake. I should have invited Emma along that day to take those, where we would have formulated those terms of reference. So that was my error from the beginning. And we discussed that in a previous meeting, and that's something that we can learn afterwards. If we do another task and finish group, that's what we'll need to do. Committee members, committee officers from the beginning.
Thank you. Before I bring in Councillor Galvin, can I ask if anyone else is having trouble hearing still? I know there's a lot of sort of background noise outside which isn't helping. I'm not quite sure what we can do to address the hearing other than shout a bit more. Well, I think
connections. One very small suggestion. So I don't wish to pick names, but please, whenever you're talking, do talk directly into the microphone, because it's very easy just to look away. And as soon as you look away, the microphone, it makes it more difficult to pick voices up. So just make sure we're doing that at all times too, because it does help.
I'm not, for two reasons actually, I'm not keen on closing the windows. One, it's reasonably warm. Two, statistically, at least someone in this room has COVID at the moment. So, yeah. So, based on the prevalence of it in the population. So, yeah, if we can keep the windows open, but be a bit louder, then I think that would be beneficial. Councillor Galvin, I think you have a process question, please.
Yeah, it's directly on that actually. I did offer to be part of that task and finish group, and I was in fact very keen to be, having been part of two other task and finish groups in the past, which I think did achieve quite a lot, and I was very keen on this topic as well. I remember it wasn't possible because of political reasons, and I just think it would be nice to reflect at this time that actually that probably isn't the best way to make up task and finish groups.
Okay. Was that about the political balance of the task and finish group?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Do you want to comment on that, Councillor Stuteley?
I think that was perhaps a comment rather than a question, but I think the numbers were set up to reflect the makeup of the council more or less without having a particularly large task and finish group.
Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, just a question to the chair about scrutiny and the function around that issue.
Well, I think we're the monitoring officer will be able to help me out here, but I think as a council we are governed around having political. We are to be balanced on committees that are set up, and I don't think that, much as we might like to, I don't think the task and finish groups are able to vary from that, or can we? Does there not have to be a political balance in a task and finish group? The Constitution is probably vague on it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm trying to think whether it meets the definition of an advisory committee under Section 182.4 of the Local Government Act 72, which I was reading the other day and I can't remember off the top of my head. It possibly doesn't, because, for example, there's situations where you may want specifically local members, and because it's advising a committee that would ultimately make recommendations, it probably wouldn't have to be. I think what we did, of course, do was a couple of months ago, and we did take a report to the Scrutiny Committee about the operation of task and finish groups in the future, and things like having set terms of reference, bringing those forward to the Scrutiny Committee to agree if they're doing work in this way, which I think is really quite helpful and productive, because it really encourages thoughts around who is on the committee, who is supporting the committee, what are the expectations around timeframes, which I think is probably quite a good piece of learning. Not only can we take away from this piece of work, but we potentially already learnt from and put into practice.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Driver indicated, then Councillor Stuteley. Then I'd like to move away from process, if we can, please.
Yeah, I just think the process is the right way to do it, and I'm sorry, Councillor Galvin was disappointed he didn't get on over. They need more seats on the council to get more seats on this committee. I mean, if I wasn't proportional, we've got enough votes in this room, the Labour majority, to have no one on a task and finish group, and they can all be under one party completely. So at least we work fair enough to split it up to what the percentage of the people who are elected by the public and who come into scrutiny and non-scrutiny committees. So it's fair and not biased.
Whilst what you're saying, of course, Councillor Driver, is no doubt correct, I'm sure you're saying it fully cognizant of the fact that scrutiny is considered to be an apolitical process, and we throw our respective party allegiances out the door when we come in here to scrutinise work. And yes, Councillor Stuteley.
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to say that following the whole process, there were a couple of members that weren't fully involved. So actually most of the work was done by yourself and Councillor Osborne and me. So ultimately there was a very even political makeup of this particular task and finish group. And just before I hand over to Andy, I'd like to thank Andy and his staff for the immense amount of work that's gone into this and for the success of it, especially the survey that's come out, because we've got some really good data to work with going forward and to inform decision making on these recommendations. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Andy, can we hear from you, please, about sort of the nuts and bolts?
Yeah.
Okay, can you use your mic?
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just want to start with thanking members for the opportunity to do this, because this was one of the first, was the first piece of work that I did when I joined the council. I didn't know what I was letting myself in for at the time. I thought, how difficult can it be to sort this out? But it's been immense the amount of work we've had to get through, and it has been a joint effort between officers and members of the committee. So I just want to thank the members of the Task and Finish Group for the support and guidance, and also the motivation and drive, because it's been a tough slog at times to get us over the line. But the members of the group have kept us going. And as Councillor Scrutiny mentioned, there's been some massive learning in there. There's been some massive learning for us in terms of data. The data's been there all the time, we've just not been using it properly, and we've gone through it in great detail, I think, and we've come up with some really useful recommendations. And also, I think that the important thing is that we target what we're doing here. So if we look at the recommendations to begin with, in terms of what we're proposed to take back to Cabinet, to answer Councillor Champion's point, this was the date. I can't remember how long we spent on this last year, but it's probably a good hour and a half debating this at the Scrutiny Committee, 24th of June last year. And that most of these areas that we're talking about, the recommendations, were working out of those discussions, and that was added to through the Task and Finish group and process. And most of these are relatively straightforward operational issues. And what in terms of recommendations, and what we found is that they've been supported, almost unanimously, I would say, through the responses that we received and the comments that we received. There's been almost overwhelming support for a lot of the recommendations that we're making at the start of the report. What we've also, I don't know if you want me to go through them one by one, but
well, just, give a sort of brief, I think members will then chip in with questions.
Yeah. So I think some of and we can also prioritise these in terms of piece of implementation, whether the camera, things like reviewing the number of implications and types of things that we have. That we look at strengthening our enforcement, including the use of CCTV. Our engagement as well, I think we need to acknowledge that it's certainly environment services, that we're poor at engagement at the moment.
I think it's fitting that it sounds like there's a bin truck driving past at the moment. So.
That we're poor at engagement, and I acknowledge that in environment services, that we don't engage with residents as well as we should do. That there's further work needed to look at local upcycling and recycling facilities as well. And in the meantime, there's some more interesting work that I've become aware of other local authorities are doing with that. We have in the meantime also improved our workflow processes between NCSL, BIFA and ourselves. That's a three-way relationship. Was really clunky a year ago. We have made improvements. I'm not saying that it's perfect now, nowhere near it, but I think for me there's been an improvement in the way that the three organisations talk to each other. We also need to improve the recommendation I think is key to this. Now we've started recording information and data, and we've now found a way of presenting it. We need to keep that going. We can't see this as the end of it. And the process is to be the start of it, really. And again, if we look at enforcement and the sanctions that we have available. So something we've not really talked about is in the report, there's a wide level sanctions that can be brought in for from a fixed permanent notice of £80 to seizure of vehicles and things like that as well. So we need to look at the range of options that are available to us. What I would say, if it's okay with the Chair, is that some of the areas where we might, we will find some difficulty, is where there are budgetary implications there, and these are spelled out in the report, so I'm just asking members to employ that when we're taking it forward. If the recommendations are agreed when we're taking that forward, the recommendations with budgetary implications to tax, I think, there's probably work on that. And they're also the ones that are perhaps more environmentally challenging as well, where we're looking at reintroducing, for example, community skips, if that was an option. There have been significant issues we operate that in the past before they were stopped in 2007, and those issues have not gone away. And in fact, they may become speculating to the existing council policy, so that would be something that we need to bear in mind. What we did in terms of the analysis of vitamin data, if we move on to paragraph 5 of the report, is that we drilled down into really finite data, so we know what's happening in terms of vitamin. In fact, we expanded it to most forms of antisocial behaviour, so that could be a dog filing, it could be littering, it could be drug use, it could be blood spillages and sharps disposal. So we now have a really good picture of what's happening in the city in terms of environmental antisocial behaviour, and that is, for me, as a new council, the city is really it's been an eye-opener for me in terms of the areas where we've got hotspots, if you like, of antisocial behaviour. What I would say is that it's that exact word that is hotspots. So there are areas where we've got very little instance of antisocial behaviour, environmental antisocial behaviour. And I think what I would like to see coming out of this is that we target our resources. So this is, I don't think it's a USFP-wide solution, that it's targeting resources to the hotspots that we have. I don't propose to go through the paragraph 6 in terms of what the data was telling us. I'm sure that will come out in questions. But again, I think in terms of the consultation that we did recently, the responses that we got, was a high level response, but I think the quality was also there. You can see that. Apologies for the lateness of the summary that you got. But what, having analysed it myself, what's coming through is that there's really broad support for all the recommendations that are contained within the report. There's also some context there, but what I would say is that in terms of comments, we also got a lot of comments. So, we get 1,300 responses. I would say most of the questions we asked had 400 or 500 comments attached to that. So people, when you take the time to give us some more detailed information there. But again, the comments coming back were supportive. Residents want something done about this. You know that, members will know that themselves from their regular contact with constituents. So the broad support for more enforcement, for more CCTV, that they want us to engage better with communities. They want us to recycle, which I think is really encouraging. They want local solutions to some of these problems. What has also come back is that we need to improve the way that we work with the county council and be better at influencing the decisions they're making around recycling centres, where they are, hours of opening, charges that they levy, and that work started at an officer level there as well. The residents do want us to revisit some of the decisions that we previously. I think I'll stop there in terms of the implications of financial resources. I think they speak for themselves. I think it's also interesting for members to know paragraph 14 that there are a wide range of, or there is a wide range of powers that the council does have. We haven't used them up until now, but that's I think 11 that I've taken from this, and I don't think I need our scrutiny committee to do some of this can be done as an officer decision in terms of improvement. It's something we've started already. We have considered other options. Principle one being do nothing, but I don't think that's not an option. As I say, there's a demand there from the constituents. It's affecting the quality of life and the environment that they live in. So, I'm really pleased about the work that's been done here, the outcome that we've got in terms of the report. And I'm happy to take any questions at this stage. If you want to hand over to Councillor Rob,
Yeah.
I'm happy to take any
No,
questions.
well, I've got a question to start the ball rolling, and then I'll invite members in. My question relates to paragraph 6, so the data. Now, the report talks about 5,000 incidents of fly tipping reported every year. Do you have any insight as to what that looks like compared to other councils?
Yes. I can't give you exact information, but every year.
Can you put your mic back?
Sorry. Yeah, every year the North Wales Partnership usually is asked as a freedom of information inquiry about levels of fly tipping in Norfolk. And what we'll find in the more rural authorities is there's a much lower incidence of it with much higher volumes. So we get a lorry loads of van loads of rubble tyres or whatever. But choose my words carefully, but the 5,000 here is significantly more than other local authorities are experiencing in Norfolk. Yeah.
So I suppose that then leads me on to, I mean, it talks about the vast majority being household waste and on council land. So can we conclude from that perhaps changing the frequency and the profile of communal bin collections, does that do something with those 5,000 bits of fly tipping because they're not fly tipping anymore?
Yeah, we did an analysis of types of materials from that kind, so that goes between furniture, bags, and all the rest of it. So it would address some of it, but some of that material depends, and that was approach coming through some of the responses that we got from the survey. That particular question, changing location, frequency of bin collection, they're saying that's not going to deal with the wardrobes, the cities, and all the rest of it, but it could deal with a significant proportion of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid I didn't see whether it was Councillor Young or Councillor Galvin who had their hands up first. So we'll go with Councillor Young, then Councillor Galvin, then Councillor Burchett-Colson.
Yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see the breakdown of waste. How much was household, how much was industrial, how much was large items. I think that would help to think about what is required.
Yeah, I think I defer to Councillor Scrutiny and Councillor Wright there, and to provide that information.
Well, I think the information is available, and so I think it can be shared with members. You can see it was used to inform the report and the survey and the recommendations that came with it. And I think members, the benefits of members, we can share that with you.
Yeah, great, thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report and all the work that's gone into it as well. It's really good to be sat here finally talking about it. It's been a long way, but I know a lot of work's gone in. About just sort of on the communal bins areas, they frequently, I know you say we're going to look into it, but I'm just going to rehearse some of the problems, and they get fill up, so their lids get left open, and then that creates a kind of fly tipping hotspot because buckets put around them. The lids are also very heavy for elderly people to open, and they're often the mechanisms that lock them into place get broken, so they get moved around, and the capacity of them isn't big enough. That's why the lids get left open. And the sort of stickers on the communal bin areas have pictures of mattresses and things on them. So if you just looked at a picture, you might think, this is where I put my mattress, and it would be fair enough to think that. So all of those things, am I right thinking that's being reviewed? And how do we know about the review going forward? Is there going to be a time limit on that review and how it moves on?
Okay, so in response to all of the above things is what I would say. I mean, one of the signs are, you have to see them to believe them to a certain extent, and I agree with what you're saying. So all of that's been looked at, because we can't just do one thing. Yeah, it's got to be a comprehensive review. Some of that work's already started. We're piloting. I mean, it sounds really low level stuff, but we're piloting use of different buildings to try and stop certain areas. The signage has been reviewed. There's definitely a commitment there to look at frequency collection, size of containers. But what we also need to remember is that we've got a commitment to increase our recycling here as part of the corporate plan. So we need to make sure that whatever we do does not reduce our commitment to recycling, and we're not generating more waste, because that's, for me, you know, as a professional waste manager, what we don't want to do is to increase the amount of waste that we're producing as a council and as residents. We want to minimise waste going to landfill or incineration and also increase recycling. So we need to try and, you know, square that circle.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burchett Colton. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, I want to understand the financial context faced by this council in 2007 and the resources available. Can either the cabinet member or the relevant officer comment on the revenue support grant available at the time and the position of the general fund and what has happened since 2007? And then also, what impact did the scheme have upon the council of recycling? Because about 10, 11 years ago, when we started to have the handy tips, I know our recycling numbers that didn't do that a lot of good by us having those handy tips. No matter, you know, even though the residents really, really loved them, that didn't do us much good at all. Thank you.
In terms of the council's financial position, 2007, unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that. I'm not being here, and it was pre-financial crash, which made such a massive difference to the council's finances. But the council would have still at that time been under a duty of best value to ensure that services are delivering value for money, yeah. And this would have been, the decision taken at that time would have been part of that programme. Also, in terms of best value, there's responsibility there for continuous improvement, and you've hit a really important point there about recycling. And at that time, I know, having been back through the council strategies over the years, the recycling was really, really low at that time. And we've gone from probably single figures in 2007 to just about 40% now. So I think it's fair to say that the council's approach at that time to financial management and the recycling was significantly different to what it is now. A lot more prudent and responsible about it.
Yeah, all I'd say is most of it went to landfill.
Yeah.
Councillor Oliver.
Approximately 14.2% was recycled, and given that our target is 50%, that's just clearly not consistent if we're going to have the same rates again. And yet, what happens to all the rest of the 100% minus 14.2? Yeah, where is it going? Landfill or incineration?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Driver.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did want to ask a couple of questions. One was back in 2007, when you used to talk about it and what we used to do. Was there any problems with flow tip in the area at the time? And my second question, I don't know who you want to answer this, but has any work been done with retailers and stuff like that? Like you sold me a mattress, they take the old one away, or you sold me a TV and will they take the old TV away? Instead of finding these down alleyways, and where they come from? Well, we don't know where they come from, that's the person who bought the new mattress up the road. But you can't prove that. So is there any work being done with retailers to put more pressure on them to keep rid of the waste as well?
Okay. If it's okay with Mr. Oliver. Yeah, in terms of problems with the operating scheme, I know from talking to officers that are still here that there were significant issues with that in terms of the volume of waste that was coming out and has not been able to deal with that, and also some of the materials that were being brought out as well. For example, asbestos, yeah, gas canisters, all sorts of chemicals, and also misuse of the system by commercial operators as well that are saving material, commercial waste for the amnesty skips coming out. So I do know, as I say, significant problems with volume and also the hazardous waste side of things. In terms of, I understand you were saying, taking older items away and bringing new ones out. Obviously, there's an option that residents can pay for that service from retailers. I think it's a really, really good point. It's something that we should be engaging with, because mattresses in particular are a big issue in the waste industry, whether they're going to landfill or whether they're being incinerated, and they're particularly difficult to recycle. So I think that's an action that I can take away to work, not just as the City Council, but in partnership with the County Council and neighbouring authorities, to look at how we can improve the way that we're dealing with mattresses and publicise services that are going to take them away.
Yeah, and I didn't know anything like TV. If you buy a brand new TV, they tell the licensing departments, if you don't buy a TV license, they do know you bought a TV now, will come around and nick you. So that is one way they find out who's got things as well. So that might be, you could put that out on materials or something.
I mean, that's an interesting point around sort of mattresses, and actually whether that's something that is achievable from a council point of view, or actually needs central government legislation in a similar way to the WE directive that dealt with how electronic items are considered. I mean, if there was the mindset in central government to put the emphasis on retailers to, for example, you sell a mattress, you have to collect the old mattress. Yeah. And if that's built in, okay, it's effectively costed in as far as the new mattress purchase is concerned, but it then removes the... But I think that isn't something we can do at a council area, but it might be something where we could write to the appropriate minister and suggest that should be something that is taken forward. Thank you for that. Anyway, Councillor Carla, you were next, please.
Thanks very much. Yes, thank you, Andy. Yes, obviously, huge amount of valuable data that you've collected. So I want to ask a few questions about fly tipping, please. To ask firstly, what constitutes a fly tipping hotspot, and how will the council decide if a location targeted by fly tipping should be made a hotspot for enforcement action? Also to ask if enforcement actions are installed in a particular location, for example CCTV, how will the council deter fly tipping from moving to other parts of the council area, to other communal buildings? And then just to look at the fly tipping map that you finally provided, which is very interesting. And what's particularly interesting is that there are terribly many hotspots, or purple ones, identified in the city centre, which I would thought there would be. It may be littering there is a much bigger problem than actual fly tipping. But anyway, that comes back to the question about what constitutes fly tipping. Thank you.
Okay, I'll answer your last question first. It didn't come through clearly enough on what I've given out, but that's a map of responses. Right. I can provide, there's a map of fly tipping as well. Right. But that was where the response, so the darker the colour on that map, then the more responses. So I thought that's on me. In terms of what constitutes a fly tipping, it's basically any kind of waste that's not presented properly. So if we look at bags, there's only certain areas in the city that are allowed to present bags where we don't have space for bins. So it could be bags, it could be, we looked at furniture. If it's not out for bulk uplift and not presented, and we know about it, then that's basically like that. So it can be anything. It can be anything from a bag, as we said, to a lorry load, a rolling dumpster, a rolling tyre. So it's basically anything that's in the wrong place. Yeah, so what we did in terms of the hotspots was we looked at the top 10, I don't have the data in front of me unfortunately, but we looked at the top 10 locations in terms of incident, and we were talking hundreds a year for certain locations. Now, there's reasons for some of that. For example, I won't name locations, but there are some parts of the city that have got caretakers, and they report a lot of them. Other reports will be coming from members of the public. So what we did in terms of the process that we went through in analysing data was to look at the top 10 areas by number of reports in the city. And what I would suggest is that that's, take this forward, that's how we target our resources going forward, that we target these hotspot areas. You're absolutely right about displacement. That came through in this survey as well, that there are concerns that if we are enforcing or putting CCTV in place, that we will displace it to elsewhere in the city. My first response to that is, well, I think we need to start somewhere and tackle these hotspot areas. A variety of means. We can do the enforcement and we can do the monitoring. But I think engagement is really, really important, because what I will say is we don't have an understanding of why this is happening. It's not, my personal take on it is, it's not all financial. With the volumes that we're getting, and some of the locations as well, I think it's a state of mind for some people, and we need to understand why we think it's okay to do this. So my response to the displacement would be that we tackle the top 10 hotspots and then we move on. And if there's through the data that we now have, we can identify that pretty quickly. We can identify where our intervention is working, but also where somewhere else is coming on the top 10 areas. And what I can do is, as I said, I can actually provide a map that shows where the hotspots are. That's okay.
Thank you very much.
I mean, it's interesting, although this map we've been given relates to responses, from local Norwich, I think we can see that there is definitely a correlation with areas that we might perceive to be where there are hotspots themselves. So for example, it's very dark in the sort of Langley Walk area, which when we did our walk around, we noted was somewhere where there was a particular problem. So I think those residents clearly have engaged with the process, which is very good from that point of view. So thank you for that. I've got Councillor Champion next, then Councillor Huntley.
Thank you. So I mean, quite lots of questions, Bill, but just one which springs to mind is particularly about communal bins. I just wanted to ask how often they're swept and how often they're cleaned out. Is there a schedule? Is there a frequency to that? There's just been some comments by residents that sometimes there's a long time.
Okay, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but there is a schedule in place for cleaning out communal bin areas on HRA sites, and I can get that for you. That's good. It's something that you can. I think in the first meeting we had last June, and right through this process, has been a regular comment that's come back about the lack of cleaning up these areas. I would buy bin collection crews, if there's spillages after collection, or after materials would flag pit, where we'll send somebody out to clean up. And again, that came out of the comments on the survey. The comments were broadly really, really positive about what we're doing. But that was one of the negative comments that took quite a bit, was that when we're out, we moved like that. So to answer your question, there is a schedule, and I can get that to you, both in terms of cleaning the bins and also the communal areas.
Councillor Oliver.
Yeah, just to add on to that, if there are areas of concern, then report them on, please. Because there's sort of such a thing, but then things can happen in the meantime.
Okay, thank you for that. Got Councillor Huntley, then Councillor Galvin, then Councillor Stootley, then Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to this issue of hazardous waste that was mentioned earlier. If we're thinking of the waste amnesty scheme, is there a way of safeguarding from that hazardous waste? Well, actually, hazardous waste, and I was thinking of illegal commercial blight tipping that might happen as well. In terms of hazardous waste, I think you mentioned asbestos. I've seen the responses that we've been handed as the supplementary materials. That issue of commercial blight tipping does get mentioned as well.
Yeah, so one of the concerns that's been expressed to me by my team is that we have these waste amnesty sites, shall we say, but once residents have brought the material out, they're not going to take it back. So we talk about control. When we start with that, so one of the ways of controlling that is to have these sites staffed So there needs to be a member of staff on site to control what's coming out. There's also, the option to record names and addresses of residents that are using it, and also to have some upfront engagement there to let residents know what things we do, what we would be accepting. And what we're also looking at as well is that this again, if this was to be accepted, this is to be in the sort of hotspot areas. I think we start terming this. What we're not looking at just now is a universal scheme across the city. So that this kind of action can be targeted. So in terms of controls, it is about, as I say, staffing these sites, making sure there's good information, prior to if this was to happen, and also take names and addresses of residents that are using it. And that can be a big challenge given that a lot of these areas it's a transient population that we've got, but those are the controls that I would look at.
I mean, it's interesting about hazardous waste in particular and what constitutes hazardous. The council shared on social media last week, I think, about people putting batteries in their sort of recycling, and they get crushed and can cause fires in the bins. So even something as small and insignificant as a battery is of course hazardous and can cause significant disruption. So
yeah, if I could just give an example of where that's happened to me, and what I forgot to mention was looking at that local authority, obviously in Scotland, and we stopped that kind of collection in mid-90s, and we were getting people coming out with milk bottles full of mercury. I mean, you think, where the hell did that come from? But that's the kind of, you've just no idea what residents have got at home, and that's when I think mercury weighs literally weighs a ton. It's an incredibly heavy metal. So you just have no idea, and that's part of the problem. You just do not know what you're going to be dealing with if you put one of these skips out and what's going to be brought out to you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thanks. I've got two sort of just very quick factual questions, I think, just about the report. Recommendation 3F, questions surrounding so workflow processes for managing pricing between NCSL and the council. It sounds like from what you said that's already been done. And what else is looking to review? And then the other question, it's another factual point. Is that all right to run another one? So if that's already been done, what extra stuff will be done? And then on paragraph 8, it says that 95% of clear up within 24 hours. What we often get from residents is that they have a case closed notification, but the rubbish is still there, and that's because it is close to the council, because they say it's not council land or whatever, so if they're not clearing it, but the residents don't find that out. The notification doesn't tell them that, it just tells them the case is closed. So the residents either keep complaining or give up or come to us for a civic inquiry. But so what does that mean, the 95%? Does it mean real clearing, or does it mean case closing?
I'll answer the first question first. It's ongoing, Mr. Galvin. I'll give you an example of what we did find when we started this process. Or maybe just before, but one of the examples was that Biffa would notify NCSL flight tipping when they found it. And they've got in-cab devices, so they've got like PDAs in their car with the bin on and stuff like that. And they send an email to NCSL, and we couldn't figure out why the material wasn't being cleared. It was because the email address hadn't been changed when NCSL. So it's really simple things like that. And we're still finding, I'm getting, there was a council inquiry that I wasn't privy to where elected members weren't getting the reference numbers coming back to them. So there would be cases closed. So it's that kind of process of looking at it, and unfortunately, things like that pop up. So I think we have to do an end-to-end review of just how, as I say, how the three organisations work together. It is, in my experience, it's a lot better. We meet with different CSL on a fortnightly basis to look at things like this. So I don't think that'll ever stop, to be honest with you. That we need to keep, and it's really, you know, it would make everybody's life a lot easier if we could get that sorted out. Everybody sitting at this table. So that's where we are with it, and that's the kind of things that we've been dealing with. When you ask about the 95% within 24 hours, this data has come out of from our community JADU, which is where the web forms are. That's the system we use for JADU. It's got JADU, and that's where all the web form information is stored. So if you are reporting an incident on the web form, that then goes to the site-wide services team and the areas of action to be taken. And I'm guessing, and I can find out, I'm pretty sure that 95% will be the case being closed rather than making sure there's definitely a response there. But I can double check that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Stubley, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Jamie. I've got a couple of comments first of all. Clearly we've had in responses, we've had broad support for at least trying all of the recommendations to some extent. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the difference between the council now and in 2007 when we had the Harvey skips. The funding that was available then for local councils was significantly different now. So the pressures, members should understand the pressures on the council over costs. And it's clear that with those, with potential for collections, again, members of the public suggested that a solution to the recycling issue was to provide 2 bins, but actually we know that that's not going to provide a solution because if one bin fills up, people will use the other bin and vice versa, and also we can't allow members of the public to kindly put their rubbish in the right bin in the first place. Unfortunately, it will get contaminated. And the comments that we received, I did notice that there were 424 incidents of the word recycling, so people are feeling concerned about recycling through this. So we do need to focus on that. And one of the aims of the committee was to increase that recycling rate from 42% upwards. So whatever we do with this, I would like to suggest that it's thought about very carefully so that those aims are achievable rather than just to find a solution for people who throw their rubbish. We need to up the rate of recycling at the same time within the new cost structure that we've had imposed upon us by central government. I've probably got some further thoughts, but I'll come back to that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was probably a thought rather than a
yes, I do actually have a question.
Yeah,
which I suppose it's related to cost, so I beg your pardon. That was just a follow-up to what we've already discussed. Yeah. So my question is about the communal bins and the potential for reviewing the bins in those flagged to be hotspots. And what would be the cost of changing the bins if such a decision were made? Is that question about redesigning all of our community bin areas or adding more bins where necessary? So it's sort of a two-part question. And it's about cost and practicality.
I need to come back to on the cost, but what I do know is probably a very high level estimate, probably £200 to provide additional bins. So the example I'm giving is that for each new property we put on, in each new wheelie bin, it's roughly £50 per do it. So you multiply that with 1,000 litre bins it's probably the bin and divide that by 240 units, which is a normal bin. So that, that's a rough cost that we would need per bin if we're bringing in additional bins. However, what I would say is We do know the cost of removing fly tipping just now, and that might be a spend to save, and I think that's something that I was looking at to do some further analysis to say, is it worthwhile investing as a preventative measure in additional funds, so that we don't have to go out collecting this in the future, because it's costing the council a lot of money at the moment. So,
Councillor Young next, then Councillor Carlo, then Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. I had two small questions about flats and communal bins. The first one was about what happens when inappropriate waste is put, say, in recycling. How is that dealt with in communal areas? I wasn't, sorry for my ignorance, but I'm just, obviously if it's an individual household, there's something put on the bin, it's not emptied, you're told you need to sort it for next time. How is that dealt with in communal areas?
So what happens just now is that it's a good example where you've got high levels of contamination in a recycling bin, a common recycling bin. As I say, if I've got these PDAs in the car, they record where that happens, and they have a dedicated collection for that they'll do at the end of the week. So where they're aware of significant contamination, they're ready to those bins to be emptied at the end of the week and just treat it as normal waste for recycling. So I'm not saying that's environmentally the best solution, but practically, and operationally, it's the best important at the moment. I think maybe the other question maybe what do we do when we need to and at the moment we don't, and it's something that we can change. But the best way to deal with it for us just now is to take the material away, because when I started I was getting some horror stories about bins lying literally for weeks and hadn't been emptied. We've managed to address that, and we've put arrangements in place. And the next stage now is to engage with residents to stop that happening in the first place. But it's a big concern for residents and elected members with bins in the land for a long time. So we've tried to move away from that.
Councillor Oliver.
Yeah, just to come back with an example, with food waste bins in the communal bins, you can get so many people that do everything as instructed and right, and then somebody will put something like a piece of cardboard or something on top, and it's not even the most kind of heinous mistake, but sometimes that all needs to be treated as some residual waste as landfill, which is really unfortunate when most people are really trying to do the right thing. I did find a load of bags from last that were really clean that were recycled and that would repurpose and recycled ones. It's just really sometimes the optimistic recycling that we can do as well. So yeah, a lot of it is about awareness and education.
Thank you. It's an interesting point actually about the red tagging of bins, particularly where there's been, let's say, people put the bin outside their property of an evening the day before their collection, particularly on terrace streets where someone's wandered past and gone, well, I'm just going to throw that in there. So you may have one item that is inappropriate sat on top of an entire bin that's been lovingly constructed with all the things that are supposed to be in it, and they get a red tag, and then they're left to sort of deal with that. I'm not sure what the fix is for that, but anyway. Thank you. So next we have Councillor Carlo.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it would be better engagement with residents is really essential, because I had a resident phone from Bolton very recently. Their community had been locked, and the residents didn't know why, so they were just starting wrapping waste around again. And I sent in a council inquiry on the transport that gas canisters had been dumped in the bin. They had to be specially collected, but the residents weren't informed. They just carried on dumping their waste on the street. And it got worse. So it would be helpful to have interim measures, or at least the residents sent a letter to explain what's happening. But on the point about the speaking the bin areas, that would really help as well, not just for politically, but as a matter of rule. Keeping bin areas clean is so important to civic pride of the neighbourhood. People feel very proud of their neighbourhoods, And I think if they see the bin areas being swept regularly, that would help people to know that they need to keep them clean. But I don't know, that would obviously have a cost implication if they were swept every 3 months, say. But I understand that the BIFA contract is being renewed at the moment, so I don't know if there's an opportunity for building that in at all. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the plans for collecting electrical equipment, fabrics and batteries from communal areas. There are plans to put such a scheme in place. But I don't know what the plan is and how to avoid the contamination problem. Whether everything's going to be dumped into the blue recycling bin, or going to be separate recycling facilities for those. But certainly on in the terrace street, people are encouraged to put out those small recyclables, but if there isn't room on the refuse van, the bin lorries don't collect them, they just leave them there, but they don't tell the resident why. And so the resident may take them in again, or they may just chuck them into their black bins. And so obviously that problem needs to be addressed, because if we're going to encourage more people to recycle, then we need to have facilities on those lorries to be able to collect all that stuff in. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please do.
I think you'd asked about that, the textile and electrical equipment recycling supplies before, I think. Yeah, and I'm giving a commitment that we're going to review that. So that's in the process at the moment, BIFA. And you're absolutely right, and I don't like saying it, and not that you're right, but the fact that you can't collect all the material is presented at the moment, and I need to find a way of resolving that, because particularly textiles, there's a lot of carbon captured in there. They're one of the highest items for wasted carbon, if you like, and it's a really easy win for us if we can manage textiles, and also electrical equipment. So it's something that we're working with BIFA on just now to see how we can increase the capacity on the vehicles. You're right, it is limited at the moment.
What about the general sweeping?
So, at the moment, there is, as I mentioned to Councillor Champion, there is a programme in place at the moment in HRA properties. And what I would say is, where we do have owner-occupiers with communal bins, that would be their responsibility. And it may be something we need to speak to the property management company about, but I don't think at the moment we're in the business of offering that service to owner-occupiers. I think that would be the responsibility.
What about council towns and communal bins?
Well, they should be. They are on a programme.
Oh, right.
They are, and I've committed to providing the schedule for that.
That would be helpful, yeah, because I'm always conscious of that staff. Sometimes there's a child especially, but not necessarily.
Well, there's definitely a programme in place.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Oliver, yeah.
Yes, I know that sometimes they do run out of space, but it's been a bit of a victim of success when it comes to things like fabric collection and electrical collections, but also I wanted to highlight Benjamin Foundation got some new reuse centre that you can drop off at Saunton Road, so that's where the old recycling centre was. And also charity shops sometimes will take not batteries, but fabrics and electrical items even if they're not working. So that's working at school. Obviously, ideally we do lots of collections, but it's not not the only answer if people do want to do that station.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Oliver. Councillor Galvin.
Thanks. It's a kind of question for the Cabinet member, really. So, Andrew said that it's costing the council a lot of money at the moment, and those are his words, and it's also causing a fair amount of heartache to residents in areas, which is why we're sitting at the table testing out really good. There was a motion in September 2020, action on fly tipping, which was quite specific, and it's unanimously agreed by Council, I believe. But when we asked questions to follow up, the Cabinet member at the time said that action wouldn't be forthcoming. And then there were budget amendments put forward in 2021 and 2022 to use Invest to Save reserve to tackle those issues again. And action on it was rejected both those times. So what I really want to ask point blank is there political buy-in now to take forward action on these suggestions that have been raised, debated, acknowledged, analysed carefully? There's clear will to do it. Can we have assurances that action will be taken now and sufficient budget allocated? And I say this in full knowledge that we are under intense pressures. I see that the cost is high of not really allocating resources to this area.
Yes, absolutely. I think some of the actions are already in place. I mean, some of the things that we've discussed are more about looking into what we can do rather than actually saying we are going to do this, say, for example, 10 hotspots. And the answer isn't into every single one of those. Well, it might turn out to be, but it, anecdotally, in my experience, it's one of the solutions, but also the right issues around education around and helping people who may become physically live in abusive substances. So, yeah, absolutely, satisfaction. I can't recall the content of the September 2020 motion.
I will remember when you don't want to remember.
Yeah, I can send it to you.
But going forward, yes, absolutely. And this is the purpose of scrutiny, is we're trying to look at how we can move forward and go into that detail. So in we're going to start to see and it's representing their community. So yeah,
Okay, thank you for that. It's got Councillor Young next, then Councillor Stutley.
Yeah, just to follow that, related to Councillor Galvin's point, a comment and a question really. Firstly, it does feel this is an equality issue because it is affecting those communities, most of all, who don't have access to cars and vans, they can't afford collection. So it really does feel like it should be a priority for equality reasons. And of course, cost of living is just going to get worse. This is going to get worse. So it'll be something that people can't afford to deal with. I suppose the question is related to that is I'm interested in what saving was made when the amnesty was stopped in 2007, 2008, and compared to the cost that increased, I assume, of that's had to go into the fly tipping issue. I'm not sure if that was in the report or said whether I missed that, but I just think that's a really important figure to be aware of, so I'd just be interested to know, because it's very related to budgeting. So.
I think Councillor Stutley, did you have a sort of...
I'll refer to the officers on this, but I have discussed this at length with officers in the past. So I know that there was a saving ultimately from it because there was still flight tipping associated with the service that was provided. So, for example, where handy skips were supplied, they were there for a couple of days, they were used, they were filled, and then flight tipping emerged around those skips. Following the removal of the subsequent removal of the skips, all the flight tipping, those sites continued to be flight tipping sites where people would attract people to them continuously. So, and all the same problems arose from the handy skips in the first place. So there was a significant cost around it. So my understanding is that ultimately there was no change to quantity rights at the time.
And did you have anything you want to...
I'm not quite sure if the handy skips the same as the waste amnesty, but certainly in paragraph 13b in the report that refers to waste amnesty collections stopped in 2007 and it was a saving of £24,000 at that time. So if at the same time then that was the saving that was delivered, what I can't, unfortunately I can't tell you is if there were any increasing costs elsewhere. But yeah, that was a saving that was allocated at that time.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stupney, you're next with a question, please.
Thank you, yes. It relates to...
I think I may have been premature there with Councillor Oliver wanting to make a comment on the previous question.
That's any question you were, isn't it? Yeah, I could just pick up on something that Councillor suggested, which is that I absolutely agree it's an equalities issue, and obviously massive concern with cost of living prices. I think we now have 2 new recycling centres, one from the original one from the south, and they replace the Petroleum centre, and also the one that sits in Swansea Road. I mentioned where the Benjamin Foundation running the collection centre now. But in the city we know that there's less car ownership, and obviously that's a really good thing. And we don't want to have cars coming in from the outside and the outskirts into the city centre recycling centre. But it does disadvantage people in terms of being able to get there. And we have it's about £30 to have the council collect those for people to collect bulky items. But obviously, not everybody has that choice between eating and paying £30 for waste to collect it. Then that's not going to be an easy thing to be able to fund. So yeah.
Councillor Stupney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Oliver. Actually, my question was going to be about that. Are there any early indications the consequences of Norfolk County Council choosing to close the city centre based on the cost recycling and moving it much further away, north and south of the city? I asked that question in the context of there being a low car ownership in the city centre, especially because residents in town blocks we know, and they are concerned about where they can take their recycling to now. And I wondered if there was an immediate impact on the amount of fly tipping that we're collecting. Bearing in mind, members of the public should actually remember that Norfolk County Council run the recycling centres, and it was not our decision to move these out of the city. It was a county decision.
I don't have any data on that just now. What we do know is that from the survey we did, that was a comment that came back really loud and clear about, well, both in terms of a specific question that was asked, what are the barriers to disposing of waste responsibly, and one of the questions we did specifically ask was difficulty to get into recycling centres. That came through really clearly, and then the other comments that came through were really clear as well, that residents were having difficulty getting to recycling centres. They don't have a van or a car, they don't have access to it, and it's also what's happening now with the cost of fuel. It's making it really, really difficult. What I will do is I'll try and find out if we do have that data going back, and I can certainly provide that to the committee if we have it. If there's been a significant change in because of that.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillors Huntley, Galvin and Fulton McAllister I've seen indicate. I'm conscious that by the time those questions are asked and answered, we'll be around about 6 o'clock. So at that point, we probably ought to start looking at what our views are on the recommendations, whether we're prepared to endorse those, whether we're looking at any changes before they get presented to Cabinet, just to sort of keep the meeting moving along. So anyway, Councillor Huntley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On the issue about barriers to accessing waste disposal, what have the impacts been of the County Council decision to increase charges?
Again, I don't have the data, but anecdotally, it's made things extremely difficult for residents where they get rid of it. The charges will relate primarily to DIY and construction waste. And as we know, there is a lot of that like that across the city, and it's something again that's come back really, really clearly in the consultation of the survey that we've done that it's a big issue for the residents. So again, I can give that commitment to try and analyse that and the difference that that's made. But there are some responses that are included in the report that come out of the survey that certainly give an indication of residents' perceptions in 3 months and the difference that that's made.
Thank you very much for that response. Given that situation, I wonder whether I could suggest a recommendation here, which is that we have, or we ask the leader of the council to write to Councillor Proctor to consider reversing this charge increase.
Potential recommendation there. Was it 2018 that charge came in?
I think it's 2018 or
2019, yes.
2019, I think it might be.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Gall.
Chair, I have a newspaper clipping actually. The Daily, Eastern Daily Press covered this at length at the time, and the Evening News. They put some good articles in following campaign by the Labour group on county, and it appears it was 2018.
Yeah, thank you. I remember it was during an election period, but that could be any year, of course. But yeah, thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Thanks. So lighting on council land is one of the biggest issues raised by residents and tenants with us. And this leads to a bit of a recommendation, although it might just be an amendment, because corporate objectives are mentioned at the report, but the policy objectives for the housing is not there. And there's a lot of these issues around communal buildings on council land. Could that be added under the policy framework? It meets the sustainable and healthy city and good shape services priorities, but could we add infrastructure and housing? It needs to be a successful city to that. So it is housing land a little bit, so that's one thing. And the other just quick thing is what's being done to share the results of the survey with respondents. And what's planned for that? Because it's obviously a really good way to engage people that cared enough to answer. So.
Can I bring Andy in on sort of sharing the...
Yeah, I think I'm just looking for it. Sorry, Chair, there is a reference within the report, I can't think of it just now, about environmental services and housing services working more closely together to improve facilities within our HRA properties. So there is a commitment within the report to do that already. If that answers your question, I'm just looking for the...
I'd just like to see it in the policy framework at the beginning, maybe, where it addresses those are strategic objectives in the corporate plans. It's got two of them, maybe it could have a third one in there.
So just, I may be missing something here, but are those policy framework things not from the council's corporate plan? So they're not, but I'm not sure we can amend those because they're the corporate plan.
No, I'm not trying to amend the corporate plan, I'm trying to refer to the corporate plan.
Okay. I mean, because you talked about an amendment to our recommendations, but the policy framework section isn't one of the recommendations. So I just wanted to get some clarity on exactly what we were looking to change.
Well, maybe we can't change the report, but then I'd like to point out an omission in the report.
Yeah.
Councillor Galvin, I'm really sorry, I can't hear you very well, but what is it that you're saying is missing?
So there isn't page numbers on the PDF, but under recommendation, the next section under that is policy framework. And at the bottom of that page, obviously it says the council's corporate priorities, and then it says which this report addresses, and it says it addresses making it easier for residents and businesses to reduce, reuse and recycle more, dispose of those efficiently, which is obviously correct. keep the city streets clean, strategic action, corporate plan. And above that it says it meets a sustainable and healthy city and Norwich City Council is in good shape to serve the city corporate priorities. So it's a sentence above where the bold writing is. So those are two corporate priorities. So there's a corporate priority around housing, and that one is, I'm sure you know, Norwich has the infrastructure and housing.
It's just a factual thing, isn't it?
It can be added.
Yeah.
As it's mainly on housing land.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not really. I mean, that's it's a factual thing that I think is that can be just added rather than yeah.
If it helps to explain, so when we write reports, we have a template, and within that template, it lists out things like the council corporate priorities and any other relevant documents. And as we produce reports, what we say is this is how it relates, so that as we look at how we delivered the corporate plan, we can relate decisions to those aspects of the corporate plan. So we're saying actually that one out, great, it's no problem. We don't need to. It's not a recommendation to cabinet. It's just something we can incorporate as we.
Just a factual matter. So it took a bit of getting to try and work out exactly, and obviously not helped by many motorcycles.
So the other question was just sharing the results, just a mark down, but it would be good to have a report about the results that can be shared with people that are interested.
Okay. And obviously I'm aware that there's been some comms work ahead of this meeting, sort of talking about the response to the survey, etc. But are you all talking about perhaps there's more sort of detailed breakdown of the results?
I think as a practice and courtesy to people that take the time to send in surveys, then it's good to have a report on the website. I mean, doing press work around it is one thing in advance of this committee meeting, but actually sharing it with people that take the time to put it in would be a good thing too.
Councillor Stootley.
Yeah, the comms work we did with this was really good because ultimately we got a huge number of responses, and I think one of the real impressive things was a text that went out to everybody that we have numbers for across the city, and following that was a huge flurry of responses. So that method could be used again to share the results. So ultimately, anybody who responded to that should get some kind of figure out. And I think it's going to be some time before we really analyse the full amount of it, especially responses from members of the public, which I think are really important because they add context and in some cases caveats to the items that we brought forward.
Actually, thank you, Councillor Stewart. You prompted a question that I'd meant to ask actually, which is on the text message. Obviously, the consultation had been running for a number of weeks. I got that text message at 11:09 on the 27th of June, just a couple of days out from the consultation closing. Is there a particular reason why? Do we know why that process was left later on into the? I mean, obviously it worked because people responded to it, but I wonder whether in future consultations we could perhaps start that earlier on in the process.
That's not something I can answer. I don't know why it went out later, but I agree with you. Yeah, if we'd done it earlier, perhaps we could have done it twice and got an even bigger.
We were wanting to run the survey we were wanting to run it for longer.
Yeah.
But the problem was, the report size and whatever. So there was a commitment to try and get as big a response as possible, and I think it may have been a case of we didn't really appreciate that option was available to us, but certainly once we knew it was, then the next went out. So we were absolutely 100% committed to get as big a response as possible, and if we could have, we would have run the survey for longer.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Councillor Fulton McAllister, I think you're oh. Sorry, Councillor Oliver wants to come in.
Yes, sorry, I was going to say it's an evolving process, and I think it was probably when things were going along, how people were engaged, and then we went out on Twitter, Facebook, and people shared them on their pages as well. So that was helpful. And then what I find with communications from the council is I get texts, and it's not everything that comes out by text. Clearly, that was a good decision to do that in this case, and some people vary of activity. But I suppose also everything that we get a text every time the council issues something from the comms department, it would lose momentum. So yeah, good choice this time. And also just with regard to feedback from people that took the time to come and to respond to the survey, just say that the minutes of this meeting will form part of that, and hopefully going forward people will be able to see that their suggestions are being considered, if not actually implemented. Hopefully that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister.
Cool. So, given that I've not spoken yet, I'm going to be trying to steal this 2 questions in this round. So, first of all, I wanted to ask Kate what she would advise the county council does to deal with bulky waste products which can't be recycled by people who have no access to cars at the moment, and trying to understand what we should be expecting of our county colleagues, especially for lower income groups who have no access to vehicles. And I think she may have touched on that earlier, but expanding on that would be helpful. The second question was with regard to the commercial fly tippers who make their business from illegally fly tipping, and also businesses who just flout the law, what we could do to take further enforcement action against them. And that may go to Kate or anybody else.
Thank you for that. Councillor Oliver, do you want to answer the first question, which I think was directed directly at you first?
Yeah, I was going to ask Andy if he wanted to answer the second question first. No, that's fine. They could just mention the Benjamin Foundation and how they're using premises responsive mobile. I haven't been down to have a look yet, so I need to find out more about the details. Obviously, sometimes with charity collections, obviously things need to be checked for safety. If you have rebuilt furniture, for example, it might not be able to be reused. So yes, to look into that, but it would be very welcome if council was to put in some funding to helping the city residents in that way, and enable people to dispose of things correctly. That was a good plan, so it was really helpful.
So on that basis, could I make a recommendation that we ask council for additional funding for certainly lower income residents without access to vehicles, so that they can have collections door to door, etc., given they move our recycling centre out of the city?
I wonder whether, given that Councillor Huntley has already proposed that we ask the leader to write to Councillor Proctor around reversing the DIY waste charges, whether we could add that into that communication about, 2 for the price of 1 there on that letter. So, thank you.
I'll pick up a point on commercial waste, if that's okay. So, there are a number of things we can do. I think the most effective would be to start prosecuting some of them. It deters the businesses that we catch, but the publicity is invaluable for that, and spreading the message that we're not going to tolerate it within the city, and that there are consequences for that. And it's something that we're looking at developing across the city as some kind of not a campaign just now, but some kind of initiative to look at that. Something we're doing in the city centre just now, we're going to tackle businesses that aren't presenting their waste properly, or storing it properly, or disposing of it properly. So I think for that one it's about enforcement. As I mentioned earlier, there are some quite significant consequences for businesses that are flag tipping. As I mentioned earlier, it's anything from £80 fine to severe vehicles or unlimited fine for flag tipping. So I think the first thing we do there is to start catching them, and we are working on that just now in terms of how we do get reports from from householders. There is a facility on the website where people can either report people that they know are flag tipping, take or send us in photographs or videos, and I think we need to publicise that more as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Carlo, please.
Thank you. But in terms of recommendations, they largely focus on reviews. So I wonder if the couple have an answer about the Cabinet will request an action plan and timescales. Otherwise, reviews could go on a very long time, and there's no indication when we're going to see changes on the ground. And I think residents will want to be assured that they're going to see changes quite quickly. It sounds, from what Andy is saying, the reviews are ongoing, and we may see actions come forward in the meantime. But also, and this is a very obvious point, that waste management and so on should be kept under review, because it sounds, from what Andy was saying, that there was a waste amnesty in 2007 which failed. The council dropped it. But after that, there was a laissez-faire approach, and things were not picked up, and they were just sort of left. And so we're now in this rather crisis situation with very large amounts of fly shipping or whatever. So those are just basic obvious administration matters. Thank you.
I was going to say, sorry, I sort of nodded over to you when I was making a note of this, but just in terms of sort of practicalities of putting timescales against some of this for when it gets to cabinets.
Well, I was hoping to defend that one in terms of the recommendation to cabinet. I don't know whether that's happy to be guided, whether that's appropriate to be coming from myself, but I can certainly talk to the concerns about waste management not being a priority within the council. As Councillor Gavin pointed out earlier, there's a corporate priority attached to recycling, and that we are monitored on that now. It's a fairly high level performance indicator that we have in terms of recycling rate. But what I'm conscious of is that, you know, the previous waste strategy has expired in 2020. Our focus has been on delivering best value. You mentioned the different contracts, so that's now been renewed, and you know, we've focused on delivering best value from that. The next stage is to develop a new strategy. There is a commitment to have that completed during this financial year. And I know from doing the elected members and also the CLT, it is a top priority potentially to get this right. So that's a commitment that I can give. The waste management is not it's not seen as a full relation with other internal council services. We also have the environmental strategy. It's up and just now, this makes a massive contribution to that. So at officer level, I think council law doesn't need to but also at a practical level, it's a top priority for the council. Yeah.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to that, with the renewing of the BIPA contract, there's a certain amount of flexibility built into that, I understand, because we've got the uncertainty of the new environment, which came to law at the end of autumn last year. But with regard to certain details of how the implementations are going to look, so extended producer responsibility, I don't think it speaks to picking up of fridges. If you buy a new fridge on Norwich, for example, but certainly with packaging, then producers will be expected to be more responsible for that from start to finish. But how that's is different that. So with things like garden waste collections too, sometimes that forms what you describe as right. So yeah, within those uncertainties, that does cause challenges, I suppose, as we look to working at them waste and environment strategies.
Thank you. Councillor Galvin. Councillor
So
Stephen.
on to recommendations really, I think, you know, just to ask officers really what we could have as a form of words around those reviews, you know, whether those reviews could be made a bit more measurable and time limited, because as Councillor Carlo said, there are a lot of reviews there, is reviewed, continues to review, but we'd like to be able to follow up on those reviews and make sure some actions happen. So that's one. And obviously funding the delivery of the service, I'd like to see added in there. I know it's hard to ring-fence anything at the moment, but it's obviously would be would cause ourselves more collection costs if we don't get this right. And then the last one, well, closer cooperation with residents, I think that does come in mentioned, but also some of the things you've outlined, this is my last point, by the way, are obviously organisational issues that have been notable of the operatives that work in the area. So it will be nice to sort of register our appreciation for the work of people that do that, and also ask them, I don't know if you've been through the process, I'm sure you have, of asking for their thoughts on how to solve these, the thoughts of the people that work in this area that so just, I don't know, I can propose that as I'd like to sort of thank the people that do that work and make sure they've been involved in coming up with solutions too.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Stootley, I think you were indicated as well.
Thank you, yes, with recommendations. There's a number of items we've talked about that we haven't managed to talk about yet, such as the bulky uplift service and the potential for reviewing the costs of that. And I was going to ask about universal credit changes and people on low incomes, cost of living crisis has significantly affected people's ability to use that service. In previous comments today, I've talked about the constraints on the council, in particular about finances. So I've got a recommendation about that that relates to the costs. And that's to ask Scrutiny to write to central government to reverse the cuts to local authorities that are contributing to many of the issues that we've discussed today. So something along those lines, please.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure group leaders will massively support that.
Thank you. Sorry, Lou, I forgot to bring you in Councillor Galvin's appointment. Did you want to? Yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Thank you. No, it was a general point to all members of the committee that you'll see in the financial and resources implications paragraph that Andy has pointed out that there's the potential for impact on budgets around many of these recommendations. So my guess would be that when these go before Cabinet, they're probably going to want to understand what those financial impacts are. And as we're heading into that period of time when we're looking at budget setting, I wonder if there's something to consider around getting some work done around costing these recommendations so that when the paper goes into Cabinet, it can be properly considered. Because I think probably it's going to be sent back for some further information, would be my guess. And actually, if you think about it, we can kind of align it then with the whole budget setting process, and we can put those options into that usual process that we go through each year. Just a thought, just something for you to consider.
Well, I think those thoughts are quite well aligned with some of the thoughts we had when we were having our sort of pre-meeting discussion earlier prior to this starting. So I think that would be quite useful. Councillor Galvin.
Just on the costing front, if it can be costed as in what it would cost not to do it as well, so not pure cost for investment proposition.
From a cabinet perspective, any recommendations that we make today, they would presumably come to September cabinet. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we've got the recommendations from the Task and Finish group. We've got additional recommendations to write to the leader of the county council, ask the leader of this council to write the leader of the county council around reversing the charges for DIY waste collection and to help those residents who are city-based to have their bulky waste collection, given that the county council decided to move its facility further away from where they live. We've also got a recommendation to ask group leaders to write to central government, asking them to reverse local authority cuts. We have a recommendation to thank and acknowledge the work that the operatives undertake, and also to ensure that there's a process for gathering their feedback going forward. Getting nods there. Sorry, they were coming a bit thick and fast. So I think that, can I double check a point? Because this was tabled, this forms part of the minutes of the meeting? The data?
Yeah, we'll have to add it online as a supplementary document that was tabled at the meeting.
So I think there was a request from Councillor Galvin to ensure that the data is published. Well, because it's on the table in front of us, it will be published anyway as part of that. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, can I have a recommendation in what I said about trying to get firms to take their gear away after they sell? However, we're going to do it, we'll get the officers looking into our cabinet, or to work to even the government to say, make it legal.
Yeah, Councillor Stuteley.
Yeah, I think that could be worded for officers to take away to work with partners and local businesses.
I mean, that's an interesting point actually, because it's probably something that is may well be taken on board by sort of independent businesses, maybe more so than some of the larger ones who would have corporate policies around why it couldn't happen. Mm. But actually, local businesses may see that potentially as a value add.
Whatever happened, it will be better for Norwich.
Yeah. So some wording around.
I know it's not my specialist area, and I give apologies to the portfolio holder and to Andy here, but there are some businesses that work with charities and so on around this, and really simple one, like when you buy a sofa from DFS, they work with the British Heart Foundation, I think it is, to take them away. So it's possibly not just contacting businesses that can do it, but actually promoting those opportunities as well.
But I think we can definitely do something around that, and I think that, yeah. But a sense that the committee is happy with that recommendation. Is there anything else that we've missed, do we think, in terms of recommendations? I hope I've picked everything up. But I mean, the $1 million question actually, are the committee happy to take forward the recommendations from the Task and Finish group and hand those over to Cabinet for further work? Yeah, lots of nods.
I think the members of the public have made that decision before.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, we may have decided to completely ignore everything the public said. Yeah. No, actually, I think, although we don't have any members of the public physically here today, if anyone is watching, I think the whole committee would like to send their thanks to those members of the public who initiated this in the first place and came along and sort of lobbied various councillors to ensure that this was taken forward, and then so enthusiastically engaged with the online consultation process, which has given us data and given us the sort of the impetus to hand something over to the cabinet member to take forward, and within the constraints of within their sort of budgetary constraints, to deliver those things that are achievable. So, thank you. Councillor Oliver.
I just want to make final comments on the engagement there, because even when the survey was shared online, people were commenting around that on the posts, and I did read as much as I could and commented a few times at freedom. So, but it's, you speak to people face to face, and you speak to resident papers, and you look at it's just really nice to see that people have got a lot of interest and a lot of energy to get involved in making changes. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you to everyone for your constructive questions and comments and recommendations today. So I think at 6:25 we'll close the meeting. So thank you all.
Yeah,